Welcome and thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
Union representatives, equal representation with employer representatives. The not-for-profit sector in particular is very keen to protect that structure, whereas the coalition opposition is very keen to see that unwound. Please give me your views that perhaps marries nicely with the diversity you were speaking of earlier.
Well, the first thing is, obviously it's not for me to get into the political situation, and I'll leave that to others who are much better experienced and more involved. The one thing I will say, and my experience is more in, say, the University Council, the problem is definitely not that one draws people from all over the place. That is a plus. You should have a diversity, no doubt about that. The problem is if you
have students on your boards?
Definitely. And by the way, some of our best council members are students. We also have staff representatives. Mm-hmm. The most important thing, though, is the question of representative. When you sit at a board, and this I'm sure all the chairs in the room are keenly, are really very aware of, people sit there for the organisation. They should put aside their representation. And this is something that people find quite hard. I must say, I think that talking to our student reps, they seem to understand this very well. They love their university and they want to look more broadly than just looking at the students. It's very hard for example, an employee representative on a board to put aside the fact, when you're talking about wages or whatever, that you are a wage thing, and indeed you've got friends who are. But you have to round a board table. So if you're saying to me, do I support having people from different walks of life round a table who come from a background of difference, some are the employees, some are the employers, I'm in favour of that. But if you say to me that they're going to sit there as a representative council, then I feel very sorry for the chairman, because basically it's a flawed model. The model must be that once you sit there, however you come, whether you came through a vote of employees or a vote of students or whatever, that you are there for the organisation. And therefore, if the chair says this is confidential, you tell nobody. And when you vote for the benefit of everybody involved with that organisation, because that's your duty. I think that it is wonderful that people have an interest when they sit round the board table, because interest is what drives us. The important thing is how you deal with what you're there for. And I think that one of the things I did at the university was I said to those who were not already directors, those representatives of staff and so on, go off to the AICD, do their course and learn maybe how not to do things, that's up to you. But listen to how to be directors.
Tell us about your experience with the University of New South Wales having students on the board. How has that contributed? And for public company boards or superannuation boards, what age is too young, do you think, to be of a positive influence?
Well, I think there's a whole lot of factors that have to be considered. First, what are you looking for? And when you're putting a team, it's the same as a football team. You need some people who can run fast, others who can tackle, others who have got such ball skills that they can toss them for miles, depending on which code you're in, by the way. But the fact is that you have to choose the right person for the seat you're looking for. Now, quite often, that will not be somebody who's very young, because they don't have the experience that you probably need for, say, a public company or whatever. But there could be times when you do need somebody young, and you were touching on it a minute ago. If you're looking for, what young people might want to do in the e-space or whatever, asking people of my age may be quite limiting. So you may need some people to inject that.
One of the key issues for the superannuation industry is engagement of members, particularly at young ages. People are 10, 20, 30, 40 years away from retirement, and therefore having an active involvement with the money that they're putting away for their retirement. So perhaps in those circumstances, is it in fact sensible to have representation on boards from Generation X and Y?
When I look back to being, as I said earlier, a director at 27, it was too early. I was very busy.
What was that on?
It was on a big listed mining company. Wow. I won't name, well, it's pretty obvious if you go back in my history, and I was out the door quite a lot because my phone was ringing. We didn't have mobiles, which shows you how old I am. But the fact is I was called up because I was a merger and acquisition lawyer at the same time. Today, I don't think that's acceptable.
Yes.
I think you've got to be there and so on. And the second thing is my scope of experience was very limited. The other point I'd make is if you set up a structure of committees like I believe in, there is no reason that those committees all have to come from the board. They can be board committees, but you could, for example, have, if it's relevant, an E-committee, a committee that looks at IT and E, and maybe the average age of that committee wouldn't be 109 like my age, but would be rather 20 or 30 years old. And you would invite people in at a time consistent with their own requirements, maybe 6 in the evening or whatever, and put to them the facts that you need advice on, and they can give it. At the university, on our audit committee, I've got 2 practicing accountants from the Big Four.
It sounds like potentially there's a lot of committees and subcommittees here, David. Some would read that as creating bureaucracy. But it sounds to me like you're saying that creates special groups that come back with expert, short, concise recommendations, and having done the research to the main board, and the main board then is able to distill all that information and be very efficient and very decisive in its actions.
Good question. If anybody in the audience is saying that I'm trying to create bureaucracy and so on, I absolutely am not. If it is more meetings as a result of what I'm doing, I would suggest to you there'll be shorter meetings, more focused meetings, and I think that a good committee, which then reports to the board, there's probably no substitute for it because they've focused on that issue. They put it to the board can then rise above and look at this issue with the knowledge that this committee has given it and decide whether it's right or wrong.
David Gonski, thank you very much for the generosity of your time and information.
Thanks, Colin.